The moment you decide you deserve more, ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the world quiets down just enough for you to hear the most dangerous, powerful, transformative whisper you will ever hear. This is not enough. Not because you are ungrateful. Not because you are impatient. Not because life has treated you unfairly. But because something inside you knows you were built for more. I remember a young man who attended one of my earliest workshops. He sat in the back row, head down, shoulders tightened, hands folded like a man holding himself together. After the event, he approached me, and with a trembling voice he said, "Didar, does wanting more make me a bad person? People tell me I should just be satisfied, that I should keep my head down, that I should stop dreaming, but the more I try to be satisfied, the louder the wanting becomes." I placed my hand on his shoulder and said something that surprised even me. "My friend, the courage to want more is the birth of every miracle this world has ever seen. Because wanting more is not greed. Wanting more is growth. Wanting more is your soul remembering who you are. Wanting more is the seed of your destiny pounding on the inside of your chest saying, 'Let me out. Let me breathe. Let me become.' Tonight, I want to take you on a journey, not just of motivation, but of awakening. I want you to walk with me through the 7 great awakenings that happen the moment a human being finds the courage to want more from life. They are not steps. They are not lessons. They are experiences of the soul. Experiences that unfold naturally when a person says, "Enough hiding. Enough surviving. I want more. I deserve more. I am becoming more." Let us begin. The awakening of the inner. There is a moment in every life when silence becomes louder than noise. When the world around you may be filled with movement, distraction, obligations, and demands, yet something inside you whispers a truth you can no longer ignore. This whisper, this gentle pull, this almost uncomfortable awareness is the awakening of the inner voice, and it is one of the most sacred moments in a human life. Because before you change your circumstances, before you break your limits, before you step into a future that looks nothing like your past, you must learn to hear the sound of your own soul calling you forward. This inner voice is not dramatic. It rarely shouts. It rarely demands. It does not force itself into your schedule. Instead, it waits patiently for the moment you finally feel tired. Not the tiredness of the body, but the tiredness of the spirit. The moment you feel the heaviness of living beneath your potential. The moment you feel the ache of knowing you could be more, do more, give more, yet somehow haven't. And when that moment comes, the voice rises and whispers, "This is not the end of your story. There is more for you." Some people hear this voice early in life. Others hear it after heartbreak, after failure, after seasons of being overlooked or misunderstood. Some hear it in success, realizing that even achievement feels empty when it isn't connected to purpose. But every human being, at some point, hears that call. And the awakening begins not when you hear it, but when you finally stop ignoring it. The truth is, we often silence this voice because it threatens the life we've built. It challenges the identity we've gotten comfortable with. It asks us to confront truths we have avoided and fears we have disguised as logic. This voice doesn't want you to stay where you are. It doesn't want you to settle. It doesn't want you to shrink yourself, to fit the expectations of the world around you. It wants you to rise, and rising always requires courage. But listen carefully, your inner voice is not here to disrupt your peace. It is here to restore it. When you ignore your calling, your life becomes noisy on the outside and empty on the inside. But when you honor that inner whisper, when you lean toward it even without understanding everything it asks of you, something incredible happens. Clarity begins to form. A sense of direction begins to emerge. The path that once looked impossible begins to look necessary, and the person you once doubted you could become suddenly feels real, reachable, and deeply connected to your truth. The awakening of the inner voice is often quiet, but it is powerful. It might show up as frustration with your routine. It might show up as a dream you can't forget. It might show up as restlessness, an unexplainable desire for something beyond your current life. You may even try to convince yourself that you should be grateful for what you have. And of course you should be. But gratitude is not meant to be a cage. Gratitude should never silence growth. Being thankful for your life does not mean you cannot want more from it. Gratitude says, I appreciate where I am, but growth says, I am ready for where I'm going. And your inner voice lives in the space between those two truths. Think of it like this. The seed of a tree holds inside it the silent blueprint of the forest it will become. Your inner voice holds the blueprint of the future waiting for you. And even though people around you may only see the seed, your inner voice sees the tree. Even though others may see your circumstances, your inner voice sees your capacity. Even though the world may judge you based on where you stand, your inner voice speaks from where you're meant to be. This voice is your ally, your guide, your compass. And when it awakens, it doesn't ask you to leap. It asks you to listen. Listening is the first act of courage. Because the moment you truly listen, you can no longer pretend you don't know what you want. You can no longer hide behind excuses. You can no longer blame your circumstances. Listening confronts you with the truth. You are capable of more than the life you are currently living. And once that truth is heard, it cannot be unheard. That is why this step is so powerful. It marks the shift from drifting to deciding, from surviving to seeking, from existing to becoming. When the inner voice awakens, it gently places a mirror in your hands, not to shame you, but to show you the parts of yourself you've forgotten. The parts that were brave, the parts that believed, the parts that dared to dream. The awakening of the inner voice is the beginning of every transformation. It is the spark before the fire, the whisper before the revolution, the seed before the forest. It is the moment your life quietly begins to rise. And if you are hearing that whisper now, even faintly, consider it a sign not of dissatisfaction, but of destiny. Your inner voice is calling you home to yourself. And this journey, this unfolding, this expansion into more, begins the moment you finally decide to listen. The courage to break your own limits. There comes a moment, right after the awakening of your inner voice, when life presents you with a choice so powerful, so defining, that it separates those who dream from those who rise. That choice is the courage to break your own limits. Because the truth that few people want to face is this: your greatest limits were not given to you. They were built by you. They were shaped by your experiences, reinforced by your fears, repeated through your thoughts, and accepted as truth long before you ever questioned them. And now, if you want more from life, you must be willing to dismantle the boundaries you built around yourself. Breaking your limits is not a physical act. It is an emotional confrontation. It is standing face to face with the stories you've been telling yourself for years. Stories like, I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not ready. I don't have what it takes. People like me don't succeed. Or, this is just the way life is for me. These are not facts. They are old, unchallenged narratives. And the moment you challenge them, they begin to lose their power. Every limit you carry is rooted in a moment when someone doubted you, a moment when you failed, a moment when you were afraid, a moment when life hit you harder than you expected. And in that moment, instead of saying, this is temporary, you said, this is who I am now. But listen to me, the moment you define yourself by your worst experiences, you steal from your best possibilities. Your limits are not walls. They are memories pretending to be walls. And courage is the tool that breaks them down. People often think limits are broken in dramatic, heroic moments of triumph. But that's rarely true. Limits are broken quietly. They are broken when you decide to get back up after a disappointment. They are broken the moment you refuse to shrink in the presence of fear. They are broken when you choose to try again. When everything inside you says stop. Limits are broken when you stop negotiating with excuses and start negotiating with your future. But here is the part most people misunderstand. Your limits don't break because you feel strong. They break because you feel responsible. Responsible for the life you want. Responsible for the potential you've been given. Responsible for becoming the person your future needs you to be. Strength is not the requirement. Commitment is. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving despite fear. And breaking your limits is not about proving anything to others. It is about proving to yourself that the version of you trapped inside your old story deserves to be free. Think for a moment about the strongest people you know. Not the loudest, not the richest, not the most successful. The strongest. They all have one thing in common. They have broken limits that would have destroyed them if they believed in them. They stepped beyond the boundaries that seemed immovable. They dared to challenge the impossible. They refused to let the voice of fear be louder than the voice of destiny. And here's the profound truth. They weren't born extraordinary. They became extraordinary the moment they decided they were no longer willing to live inside the prison of their own limitations. You see, your limits don't disappear when you want more. They disappear when you demand more. When you refuse to let your history define your capacity. When you stop treating your fears like facts. When you stop giving power to the opinions of those who never had the courage to break their own ceilings. Breaking your limits requires honesty, brutal honesty. The kind of honesty that forces you to admit, I am the only one holding myself back, and I am the only one who can set myself free. But breaking limits is uncomfortable. It stretches you. It exposes you. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you've avoided for years. It requires you to step into arenas where you feel unprepared. It demands courage when you feel fragile. It asks you to become bigger than your excuses and stronger than your past. This is why so many people avoid the journey. They prefer the familiarity of limitation over the uncertainty of expansion. But comfort has never created greatness. Safety has never produced transformation. Staying small has never built a life of meaning. When you break your limits, everything begins to shift. Your posture changes. Your energy rises. Your self-respect deepens. You begin to look at yourself differently, not as a victim of circumstances, but as a creator of possibilities. You start developing a new identity, one built not from fear, but from courage. And that identity becomes the foundation upon which your future is built. Breaking your limits is not about creating a new life. It is about creating a new self. A self who believes. A self who tries. A self who dares. A self who refuses to stay trapped in the outdated version of who you used to be. And when you break one limit, something miraculous happens. You realize it was never real. You realize the barrier was made of dust, not stone. You realize the chains were made of fear, not truth. And you begin to wonder, if that limit wasn't real, how many others have I been living underneath? This moment, this realization, is the beginning of transformation. Because once you break one limit, the desire to break them all ignites. And you step forward not just with courage, but with certainty. If I can break one boundary, I can break every boundary standing between me and the life I was born to live. The battle between who you were and who you are becoming, there is a sacred tension that every person must face on the path to wanting more. A battle not fought in the world outside you, but in the world inside you. It is the quiet, invisible, deeply personal conflict between who you have been and who you are becoming. And no matter how motivated, inspired, or awakened you feel, you cannot escape this battle. You must walk through it. Because wanting more is not only about reaching higher, it is about leaving behind the version of you that was never meant to carry you into your future. This inner battle begins the moment you decide you are no longer willing to live small. The moment you say, "I want more," a line is drawn inside your soul. On one side stands the familiar you, the you shaped by old patterns, old fears, old habits, and old beliefs. On the other side stands the emerging you, the you shaped by courage, clarity, desire, and possibility. These two selves cannot walk together. One must lead while the other fades. And the painful truth is, the old you never leaves without a fight. You see, the old self is comfortable, predictable. It knows the rhythms of your past. It knows the fears you run from. It knows the excuses you have practiced. It knows the limits you obey without question. The old self survives on routine, familiarity, and repetition. It thrives when you choose what is easy over what is necessary. It whispers, "Stay where you are. At least here, nothing surprises you. At least here, you won't fail. At least here, you won't be judged." But this voice is not guidance. It is maintenance. It is not protecting your life. It is protecting its own existence. And then, there is the becoming self. The future self. The self that whispers from possibilities not yet lived. This self speaks differently. It speaks with truth instead of fear. It speaks with vision instead of memory. It speaks with courage instead of caution. It pushes you to step into conversations you've avoided, decisions you've delayed, and opportunities you've convinced yourself you weren't ready for. The emerging self wants you to rise, not remain. It invites you into discomfort, because discomfort is the door to transformation. It challenges you because challenge is how you are sculpted into the person you were meant to be. But here is the tension most people never understand. Both selves sound like you. Both feel familiar. Both feel like home. And that is what makes the battle so difficult. You are not fighting an enemy. You are fighting a version of yourself you've lived with for years. Breaking limits is hard, but breaking identity is harder. Because your old identity has evidence. It points to your previous failures. It reminds you of the times you tried and fell. It highlights the moments you felt small, unseen, unprepared, or unworthy. It convinces you that the safest way to live is to never stretch beyond the life you already know. But your becoming self has evidence too. It points to the moments you were brave when no one saw. It brings forward the dreams you've carried for years. It reminds you of the times you rose from situations that should have broken you. It highlights the strength you've buried, the gifts you've forgotten, and the visions that still refuse to leave your heart. This version of you has been waiting, patiently, quietly, faithfully, hoping you would one day rise to meet it. The battle between these selves is not won in a single moment. It is won in a series of choices. Every time you choose to act instead of avoid, you strengthen the emerging you. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, you weaken the old you. Every time you choose courage over comfort, you step one layer deeper into the person you are becoming. Transformation is not an explosion. It is an accumulation of brave decisions. And every brave decision pushes the old identity a little further into the shadows. But let's be honest, this battle is emotional. It can feel like grieving a version of yourself. You will feel fear. You will feel doubt. You will feel resistance. You may even feel guilt for wanting more. But understand this, you are not betraying your past when you grow. You are honoring it by refusing to let it limit you. You are not abandoning who you were. You are evolving beyond who you needed to be in order to survive. And survival is no longer your assignment. Becoming is. The moment you realize that the old you cannot take you where you're going, something shifts. You begin to walk differently, think differently, speak differently. You begin to see challenges as invitations rather than obstacles. You begin to recognize that your fear is not a stop sign. It is a signal that you're stepping into unfamiliar, but necessary territory. And when you feel the pull of your old identity trying to drag you back into comfort, you remember a profound truth. The life you want is not behind you, it is ahead of you. The battle between who you were and who you are becoming is the proving ground of every dream. It is the space where destiny is shaped, and while the struggle may be painful, it is also beautiful. Because every day you choose the emerging self, you step one breath closer into the life you were born to live. The courage to break old patterns. There comes a moment in every person's life when the mirror stops being just a reflection and becomes a confrontation. A moment when you don't simply look at who you are, but at who you've been repeating. A moment when you realize that the life you are living is not shaped by fate, not by chance, not by destiny, but by patterns. Patterns that were formed long before you ever had the courage to question them. And step 4 in the journey of wanting more demands exactly that, the courage to break the patterns that have quietly limited your life, while pretending to protect you. Because nothing holds you back more powerfully and more silently than the familiar. You see, every one of us has patterns, emotional, behavioral, mental, built through years of repetition. Patterns of how we respond to fear, patterns of how we handle failure, patterns of how we speak to ourselves when no one is listening. And these patterns can be like invisible threads tied around our potential, gently pulling us back every time we try to move forward. The courage to want more is not truly tested when life is easy. It's tested the moment you choose to step out of the cycle your past self created. Because breaking a pattern means breaking an identity. And that is one of the hardest battles a person can fight. Think about how many times you said, "This is just how I am," when really what you meant was, "This is just what I've repeated." Think about how many times you said, "I've always been like this," when what you really meant was, "I've never tried to be anything else." Change begins the moment honesty becomes louder than habit. And this is where the courage enters. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind, the steady kind, the kind that whispers while your fear is screaming. Step 4 reminds you that wanting more requires disrupting the rhythm of your old life. If your past patterns created your current reality, then your new patterns will create your new future. But here's the truth. When you start breaking old patterns, you will feel resistance. Not from the world, but from within. The familiar will tempt you back. Your mind will try to negotiate. Your comfort zone will whisper, "Come back home. It's safer here. It's easier here." But comfort is the enemy of more. Ease is the enemy of growth. Familiarity is the enemy of transformation. Every breakthrough begins with a breakdown. Not a breakdown of your spirit, but a breakdown of the illusions that have kept you living beneath yourself. You have to challenge your automatic responses. You have to interrupt your default reactions. You have to pause long enough to ask, "Is this who I truly am? Or is this just who I've gotten used to being?" Because the moment you ask that question honestly, you open a doorway inside yourself. And that doorway leads to a version of you that has been waiting behind the walls of habit. Sometimes breaking old patterns means letting go of people who were only comfortable with your smaller self. Sometimes it means admitting that you've been sabotaging your own progress because progress demands responsibility. Sometimes it means standing up to the version of you that is scared of disappointment, the version that has chosen to shrink rather than try. But here's the miracle: the moment you break one pattern, even a small one, the entire rhythm of your life begins to shift. One new choice can undo 10 old excuses. One bold action can silence years of hesitation. One step forward can teach your soul a new language, the language of self-trust. Breaking patterns is not an overnight transformation. It's a daily commitment. It's waking up and refusing to think the same thoughts that drained you yesterday. It's refusing to behave in the same ways that kept you stuck last year. It's refusing to carry the same beliefs that held you captive for far too long. The courage to break old patterns is really the courage to rewrite your internal script. And when you change the script, you change the story. When you change the story, you change the direction. And when you change the direction, you change the destiny. And so step 4 becomes a sacred moment. A moment when you choose to disrupt the old in order to make space for the new. A moment when you stop repeating history and start creating possibility. A moment when you stop living from memory and start living from vision. This is the courage to break patterns, the courage to interrupt the old rhythm so you can dance with a new future. Because wanting more requires becoming more, and becoming more requires breaking free.